Hello and welcome to the 57th edition of Half Hour, a podcast starring me, John Paulo Giudice, as your host. In today's episode, I will discuss Cold War intelligence operations in Albania with Peter Kadeli. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
My friend, thank you for having me.
No problem. Peter and I have known each other for many years. We went to high school together here in Peabody. We went to different directions in college, but of course, we always sit down and say hello, but I'll let you give your introduction and, just tell the audience a bit about yourself, and then we can dive right in.
Absolutely.
And, just a side note, it's been a little while since I've done this, so I'm getting my sea legs back a little bit. So.
It's always good. So, as you know, we went to high school together. You were one grade above me. Always obsessed with history growing up. It's a fascinating subject for me. I know we'd always talk about it in high school, and just it never gets old. Times are so much more simpler. But eventually I went to Norwich University. I graduated with a bachelor's in criminal justice, and I also attended the Corps Cadets program over there, where I eventually commissioned into the U.S. Army Reserve, and I am now an intelligence officer. Currently now, aside from just being with my unit, I am currently going for grad school right now. I'm getting my MPA, and hopefully once I get my Master's in Public Administration, I will would like to achieve working as a security consultant with everything that I'm learning so far. So, yeah, that's a powwow about me.
And I think you've done a brilliant, trajectory there. Your country thanks you as well as me.
Thanks for the support.
We had the best teacher in high school. Yeah. We really did. She was the best. I'll keep her name off just for, purposes.
Privacy
but
reasons.
yeah. But, she had all these World War II, pictures in the classroom, like the posters that you'd see, like the Uncle Sam, even like World War I. I think she had some Civil War stuff in there.
Yeah.
So fascinating. I love the artwork.
Easily best room in the entire school.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, come on. Yep. Okay, so if you want to jump in, we can do that. I know we should probably review the history just a little bit. I'll tell you briefly what I know.
Yeah.
I've known you for a long time as well, so I know a bit about the Albanian history there. What you've told me, but even some of my coworkers when I lived in Europe, even here, they were Albanian too, so I was happy to share what I knew. But if we're talking modern Albania, I know that in 1905 there was a revolt against Turkish rule. Yep. The country gained independence in 1912.
That's right.
It's located in the southeastern part of Europe in the Balkans.
Yep.
Its neighbors are Greece, North Macedonia, Montenegro,
Serbia,
Kosovo. They fought in the. Did they fight in the Balkan Wars? They were liberated by Serbia, or
they did their part in the Albanian revolt in 1912, and then they were sitting both Balkan Wars out. Basically.
Oh, okay. And then, World War I happens, the interwar period comes. I know that essentially King Zog accepted, the monarch of Albania accepted money from the Italian fascists at the time, and was occupied by, this nationalist Italy at the time, this fascist Italy under Mussolini. World War II ends, the communists come in, Cold War. Although they're not totally affiliated with the Warsaw Pact, like the Soviet-led system, much like how Tito's Yugoslavia wasn't.
Yep.
And then the Cold War ends, and we're in the modern period. Albania is in NATO, and I believe is aspiring to join the EU, over time. But yeah, I'm not going to steal the show here, but that's what I know about Albania. A couple million people today. But I'm just going to go ahead and let you take it all over now, because that's about as much as I know.
No. You explained a lot of the cliff notes about it, and it's Albania was quite literally. Throughout ancient times and modern history. Personally, I'm a big enthusiast of modern history. I do dabble a lot with ancient history, but 1900s and on, that's when I was really focusing a lot of my efforts on studies. I mean, I know if I wasn't an intelligence officer, I'd easily be a history professor without a doubt.
Yeah, right.
I'd love that job. But quite literally, it was a real-life Game of Thrones throughout its history. And, you know, many nations, many empires coming and going. And, you know, what it originally was, the Illyrian people under the Roman Empire, which is where basically how its roots started. But aside from that, yeah, so I guess a good way to start is with the Italian occupation of Albania. In basically Mussolini, a lot of influence was going into the country. The West was slowly losing its grip upon the Albanian kingdom once Zog basically inherited it and basically made himself a self-made monarch. Push comes to shove, they get more aggressive, and Mussolini eventually gives Zog an ultimatum saying, hey, give me your country, otherwise I'm mobilizing my military in with or without you. Zog submits, as we know, to the Italian demands. I mean, it was quite literally like, it was crazy. I mean, they're like military police force that they had. I remember I was reading a book once that, I mean, it was all British officers after the First World War and the interwar period, and then, you know, Zog was just getting more and more influence and just fell more and more with the influence of Mussolini. And yeah, no, he straight up just, you know, kicks them out and starts taking more Italian officers. But at the same time, those advisors were giving very valuable intelligence to the Italian military as to where strategic points are. So it was almost, yeah, quite a kind of doomed to start.
So, you know, this definitely reminds me of the German occupation of Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
You know, I lived in Prague for 2.5 years, and these people have not forgotten about their history with Germany, more so with Russia now, because of, you know, everything that's going on. But it seems like this is just a kind of a Mediterranean version of this. Was the occupation of Albania by Italy used for? I know that they later invaded Greece and failed. The Italian armies failed.
Yeah.
In Greece, in North Africa, pretty much everywhere they fought in World War II, the Italian armies didn't do that well.
Yeah.
So, was it to be a launch pad into Greece, to project power into the Balkans? Was it some combination of these two and more? Like, what was the reason?
Extending their sphere of influence, more or
Okay.
less.
Yeah. All right.
Just like when they claim a protectorate, obviously, you know, claim the resources, claim any influence around the Balkans. They were, I mean, as Mussolini, he wanted to rebuild the Roman Empire.
Right,
so
that was his goal.
Obviously, it was to start taking those states. But yeah, essentially, once the Italians come in and King Zog accepts the ultimatum, ironically, he, of course, takes his royal guard with him and the entire national treasury along with him.
Where does he go?
Goes into Greece, crosses the border into Greece, you know, takes the entire treasury with him. Ironically, in a convertible that was gifted to him from Adolf Hitler, actually, at the time when he got married to his wife. But he goes into Greece, eventually goes to Egypt, into Cairo, spends a little bit of time in the United States, and, you know, back in Paris after the war is over.
Yep.
And yeah, no.
So he goes from Greece to America.
Yeah, spends some time there.
Right, because I was thinking, like, okay, Italy gets invaded, or Greece gets invaded by Italy.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so he goes to America. World War II happens, and
Yep.
then I know. So did Albania liberate itself much like Yugoslavia did, or, you know?
More or less with the support of Allied intelligence services. So Albania did have the eye of the British SOE, which was their new. It's like, it was basically their unconventional warfare group that they made.
Yeah.
So the British, they were not gonna lie, I mean, if we're talking objectively here, they're, I think, 20 years ahead of us when it comes to intelligence services and espionage. Back then, yes.
Yeah, of course.
Espionage operations and the SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service, now that we know as MI6, they were literally started at the 1900, basically the beginning of the century. So they had a good head start with us, but then, of course, we learned from them. We exchanged a lot of information and strategy and doctrine, and the United States forms the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services.
That becomes...
Which then becomes the Central Intelligence Agency.
Okay.
So there was a lot of operations during World War II that the OSS and the SOE did hand in hand. Basically, Albania during World War II was a lot of partisan groups. So we had obviously the communists, right? The head of that group was Enver Hoxha, who then becomes the dictator.
Right.
But there were also a few Republicans called Bali Kombetar, which literally translates to National Front. And they were a mix of essentially collaborators with the Axis powers and just straight up Republicans. And then there was a few pro-monarchist, do-or-die pro-monarchist movements that still wanted the king back. So Western intelligence at the time they had to be friends with the good of the very bad lot. And
Right.
they had no other choice but to side with the communists, basically, Enver Hoxha. So there was a lot of partisan operations, resistance efforts done with Axis infrastructure and military. So that happens. After that, of course, World War II ends. Western intelligence then starts to lose their grasp as to who takes control of what.
Right.
And
so it gets very murky. Like it's just
exactly, yeah.
It's kind of like World War II is ending. From what I got, by Republicans, guys, I think he means like Democrats, like democracy, like in the classical term.
That's right.
Just a lot of Americans might misconstrue that.
Yes. Yep.
Totally understandable, actually. But what I
Land of Eagles.
So it's okay, man. One time we had a show outside, and there was like a man like walking, like he was like walking around my car. It was like we did it near a church, and I was like, what is he doing? Like I was like looking at him. Okay, so
Weird world.
So the communists of Albania towards the end of World War II, while the country's under occupation, work with like people who are working for democracy, like they want like democracy in the country, ideologues like that, and they're working with parts of the then outgoing like Axis group too. So it's kind of like all three are working together.
So Bali Kombetar at first they were against the Axis occupation, right?
Right.
Then after 1943, they started to collaborate with the Germans and the Italians because they were seeing that the communist partisans were actually getting more and more power
within the National Front.
Within the National Front,
okay,
yeah.
All right.
So a lot of cutoff. Literally, it's like a Game of Thrones. Like a lot of cutoff movements started to happen. And yeah, some of Bali Kombetar join the Axis powers. Others then decide to side with the communists, who are aided from Western intelligence, of course.
So it's kind of like, within this National Front, you have many, many, many different beliefs going on.
Exactly. It's
all
like the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, all looking for the liberation of Albania.
Correct.
But the communists within this group gain a lot of power.
Yeah.
World War II basically ends. The communists, in a very murky, messy way, take power in Albania. Does Enver Hoxha take over then? Or is there other people? Fun fact about him, he built a lot of bunkers in Albania. A lot.
That's quite literally. It will never be. That's one fact that will never be forgotten.
Yeah, that's the one thing I remembered, man. I remember you told me this in high school. You were like, this guy built like, what is it, like 1 million? Like almost 1 million bunkers?
600,000.
Yeah, that's
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was protected to the teeth. But essentially towards the end of World War II, they gained a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of expected. The Soviets were rolling in through the Eastern Front. Yugoslavia obviously was getting under their influence, and of course, with the help of Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union, he gains, big arms trade.
Right.
And it's, basically whoever has the most boomsticks, is going to have most of the influence in the nation.
So what would you say is a pivotal, like when we're talking about these counterintelligence, what would you say is one that sticks out to you, like critically, like one that you've studied?
So one that I've looked at the most, I recently just finished a book called Operation Valuable, which was basically the pinnacle of quite literally Western intelligence, like how it started, when the CIA started and when MI6 was really starting to get its feet wet in espionage. Operation Valuable was one of the first strikes against the Iron Curtain from Western services, and
What year was that?
In the 50s, 1949 to 1955.
When was the Suez Crisis? Was that like 54 or something?
50. I'm not good with dates.
Isn't it bad? Like I know
yeah.
Eisenhower was president. I think Khrushchev was in charge by this point.
He was, yeah.
So it must have been after 53. I know Eden was the prime minister of the UK.
Yep.
Obviously Israel was involved with this back then.
Yeah.
Not to detract, but I'm trying to get a.
No,
I know
I feel you.
the late 40s, early 50s was that's actually a very interesting time to study the Cold War. You had the Berlin airlift.
I mean, it's when the Cold War started to get hot.
Yeah.
Literally, there were many instances where we could have entered a third world war.
Oh yeah.
And it was quite incredible how we just didn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So basically, Hoxha, when he takes power, of course, what does he do with the dissidents? Basically, I mean, he exiles them, imprisons them, or executes them. At the time, he starts obviously like a directorate of state security called Sigurimi, Drejtoria Sigurimi të Shtetit, which translates to director of state security, like the East German Stasi or the KGB.
Right. Okay.
So he has his, at the time, right-hand man, Dzodze. He basically starts rounding up all the dissidents, anyone that's in opposition, and of course carries out his political purges, obviously cleansing whatever's left.
So like a miniature version of Stalin's Great Purges in the
yep.
Soviet Union.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ironically though, this was basically around the time where Yugoslavia was starting to have a little bumpy relations with Stalin, and when Tito basically had the guts to tell him, like, hey, there's no smoking in this room, basically. And quite.
I was thinking about how Stalin tried to assassinate Tito many times.
He did.
And Tito replied to Stalin. He said something like, "I will only need to send one. Like don't send any more. I'll only need to send one guy, or like one time it'll take me." And I think that's when Stalin kind of let it go. And I think Stalin ended up dying pretty soon after that. So it makes you think.
Died in his own urine, yeah. So.
Yeah, good riddance.
Yeah, basically this is around, when Yugoslavia was having bumpy relations with the Soviet Union, and Dzodze at the time, he then got exposed with wanting to side more with Belgrade rather than Moscow.
That person you just mentioned, that's Enver Hoxha's right hand.
Yeah, for the state security, basically.
Okay, yeah. So again, Hoxha is the leader of Albania after World War II.
Yep.
The communist leader. How do you pronounce this other guy's name?
Dzodze. It's
Dzodze.
Albanian names, like when you see the alphabet, it's
the two dots, right?
It's X's actually.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's Xoxe, but you pronounce it Dzodze. So
Dzodze.
Yeah.
So this gentleman was, I don't know if he's a gentleman or not. This person was his kind of right hand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Lavrenti Beria for the NKVD.
Okay, right,
yeah.
for Stalin and
exactly.
Khrushchev for a bit.
So he eventually gets caught, not necessarily caught, he basically insinuates his opinion of wanting to side with Belgrade rather than Moscow. And Hoxha is a staunch Stalinist. He was the son.
I didn't know that, actually.
Oh yeah, no, he was the son that Stalin never had, essentially.
Okay. Yeah.
Worshipped him. And eventually he sees that, he wants to basically build ties with the Yugoslavian Federation, and has a secret child with him, tortures him, and executes him. And then replaces him with another guy named Mehmet Shehu. So
That becomes the new right hand.
that becomes the new that becomes the new head of state security in
Gotcha.
Albania.
So
Yeah.
what was an operation that involved maybe them? This is adventurous for me to say, but I'm assuming that they did something with southern Yugoslavia, because I know there's a lot of ethnic Albanians living in the region outside of the borders.
Yeah. So eventually, Zog, as we mentioned him, right? Zog sends a letter to the U.S. Embassy in Cairo at the time.
Gotcha.
And he, of course, explains his ambitions of, wanting to take the country back, and explaining how the dictator's very unpopular. He rules with an iron fist.
Didn't people not want him? They were like, "We don't want you back."
He's not a popular figure, no.
Yeah.
But
okay.
I mean, what can I say? He wants it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, sends a letter there. So the OPC, the Office of Policy Coordination, which was a branch of the Central Intelligence Agency at the time before they merged, completely with the CIA. He sends a letter to them. They start hatching out plans with an operation called BG Fiend, Operation BG Fiend.
Yep.
This was essentially a lot of, basically, they trained in West Germany, they trained in basically, where NATO started, any bases where NATO started to form.
Right.
And they do, essentially, he grabs a lot of exiles, right, people who were ousted from the country during the purges, former monarchists, and even former collaborators with Bali Komentar. It was like 40% of the National Front, 40% monarchists,
right.
and the remaining 20% are, the pro-democracy, pro-republic people.
So again, it's like a group of people that want to dislodge communism there.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
That want to go back and, liberate it from the authoritarian government that was forming there.
Yeah.
It was quite literally like Europe's version of North Korea. So,
yeah.
As brutal as you can think.
Yeah.
So they hatch out plans, and meanwhile, the SOE, the British SOE, many former agents from the SOE, they start to then share intelligence with MI6, and MI6 starts their own operation called Operation Valuable. So, two nations, the U.S., the U.K., they form their own ops against
Five
Albania,
Eyes.
right? Yeah, basically.
That's what it becomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they sort of shared strategy, and they sort of shared strategy and doctrine and just basically what their activities were going to be, but not fully, right?
Right, yeah.
It was very disjointed. Again, they were testing their feet, basically. They were testing how were we going to do espionage ops for the next 50 years of the Cold War, essentially.
Yeah.
It was literally like one of the first strikes of on the Iron Curtain. So
what exactly, so we have all the pieces, right? So Zog goes to the U.S., basically he's like, I want to take, my country back.
Yeah.
And the U.S. gathers some intel on that, and it's kind of like, here's the types of people that are in there.
Yep.
I don't want to say percentages, but, just kind of like echoing what you were saying with like, what kind of people were part of this operation.
Yeah.
Who was sponsoring it. So what was like what happened next?
So there were numerous attempts, basically, many airdrops from, sponsored from MI6 and the CIA.
Probably launching from like southern Italy or Greece. Right?
Yeah, southern Italy, Greece, and literally Yugoslavia was also hosting these ops. Yeah, no, Tito was
third way, very much third way. Yeah. What do they call that? The neutral movement. You know what I'm talking about. Non-aligned countries or something.
The non-aligned movement, basically.
Non-aligned movement.
I forgot what their foreign policy thing was called, but essentially, so all three nations, right? And it was kind of in their interest at the time, because Albania, once they cut almost all ties with Yugoslavia, right? Essentially,
that was very early on. They did that.
Very early on, right?
Okay.
The Soviets saw that as an opportunity to put their submarine bases basically.
In Albania.
Yeah, in Albania, and have a foothold in the Adriatic coast.
So
right?
how did they, on like a very much a side note, how
Yeah.
did they get through the Bosphorus? Or did they sail their... I'm guessing what they did was they sailed from the north, the Arctic, around through Gibraltar, back to Albania.
Yeah,
That's what I'm guessing.
essentially.
Like, I don't know if Turkey would let them out, like, of the Bosphorus. Then again, I don't know. They had what is it, the Montreux Convention? With the
What,
boats, like even, that's going to expire soon, by the way. That was 1924, I think.
No
The
kidding.
Montreux Convention, yeah, that was after World War One. It was regarding what types of vessels can sail through the Bosphorus.
Okay.
Like, I think basically the stipulations were like, unless it's like a certain type of Navy ship, it's like you can't. See, I don't know. It's something about the shipping. Like, I think it's like you can have the boats going in for free. That's why Erdogan wants to build the canal to make Istanbul an island, because then he can use. This is what I think is going to happen. This is like a total side note.
Yeah.
But I think he's going to build this other canal to supplement the existing one.
Yeah.
And to be able to tax boats going through. And I think he's going to try and make the Bosphorus less usable, turn it into like a more, almost like a UNESCO region, almost like this is part of our ancient city. You know, we want to like preserve. You know, whatever
Yeah.
he's going to do. I know that it has to do. The Montreux Convention has to do with the boats going in and out.
It
I
depends.
totally just went
I mean,
sidewinder. But
It depends. I mean, how we got his submarines through in secret. But
Yeah, like,
ultimately, wanted to build sub bases over there, and also the Greek Civil War was raging in the 50s, right? So the Soviets, seeing the the communist partisans in Greece, saw Albania as a bottleneck to fund arms to
Launch
the
pad,
as
like
a launch
just to-
pad. Yeah,
Gotcha.
just to send arms through basically to the rebels, which were up north.
Yeah, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
like
so it was
geographically.
going to work perfectly. So, MI6 in the CIA was like, all right, we got to do something to like at least halt what's going on before.
Also to support Greece.
Exactly.
The Greek. Was it the Kingdom of Greece at the time?
Kingdom of Greece, yeah.
I know they abolished the monarchy
They
at some point.
did, yeah. The Greek junta did.
Yeah.
Once they took over, yeah.
That was in the.
in the 70s.
Yeah, I remember this from the show, The Crown.
Yeah.
They had scenes of like the.
Yeah.
I don't want to say Mother Teresa she's Albanian actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mother Teresa's Albanian.
Yep.
It was the mother of somebody. They showed in the show. It was I think it was the king's mother.
I haven't seen it,
King
so I mean,
consort,
I don't know.
consul. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever it is. It's a great
No,
show.
yeah.
That's a good show.
It is. No, I heard so. But yeah, essentially, what they do is that their main points were economic warfare,
Yeah.
sabotaging tractor factories, truck pieces, and it was quite literally their intro project to starting psychological operations. So, these partisans, they would mail like, kind of blackmail and sort of like, humiliating mail to like party officials and kind of like stir up their legitimacy and even create like suspicion within and make it think like, oh, we have a mole in our government, and like basically make people not trust each other.
In Albania.
In Albania, yeah.
So these partisans were usually on the outside of the country,
Well,
Some of them were inside.
outside, inside, yeah.
and their goal was to destabilize the regime
Destabilize, exactly,
during the Greek
yeah.
Civil War.
During the Greek Civil War, and
Right.
basically halt as much like arms shipments and influence that the Soviet Union could basically put into
Send
the entire
through.
Balkans. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And also, but Yugoslavia was in their interest to collaborate with the West on this because, I mean,
Destabilizing
Yeah.
Albania would probably help them.
Albania would
Yeah.
put less Stalinist influence around their borders.
Right, which is
Yeah, which of course ends up in their favor. So this I'm gonna say this operation was an operation of failure because of course Hoxha still stays in power for the entire duration of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And yes, like it was a lot of agents died, a lot of agents got executed actually, or imprisoned, but it basically served as a template for how are we gonna contain nations going through any kind of influence from the other side of the Iron Curtain, essentially.
right.
And quite essentially, they had of course, a lot of the information that they were getting, right? It just wasn't. It was either outdated information from what they were getting from World War II. A lot of
Like U.S. and U.K.
U.S. and U.K. Yeah,
They were getting outdated information.
just outdated info. They didn't know how strong how strong like their intelligence services were.
Yeah, what the metric was in Albania too, like how many people were.
Exactly. There was two aspects that failed the op. First, it was Kim Philby. I don't know if you're familiar with the Cambridge Five. It was a big intelligence leak in the UK, where essentially he was an intelligence advisor to Washington during this operation, right? But he was a mole for the Soviet Union essentially. And he leaked many aspects of this operation to the KGB, which then tipped off the Albanians, and essentially, that's what led to a lot of failed missions. And the Sigurimi at the time, they actually infiltrated many groups that were training. They were training in Malta and West Germany and Italy, right? And they used a committee at the time, the NCFA, the National Committee of a Free Albania, right?
Yep.
And
that was sponsored in the West.
That was sponsored by the West, yeah. Their headquarters was in New York and in Paris, yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
and that was used as a mechanism to recruit agents aside from Zaw, giving his recommendations, other
his
aspects.
influence.
Exactly, yeah. Other aspects of that. They were looking for the most enthusiastic people who would serve as, good agents to serve in the region.
Okay.
And the Sigurimi actually infiltrated that group, and they started to basically see how their process would work, who would get recruited, and who would basically get sent to a training camp.
Right.
And basically some infiltrated, gave information to them. Some actually served as double agents, essentially. And, of course, with the Kim Philby leak, that, of course, was a big wake-up call to Western intelligence, saying, like, hey, you guys failed in one major aspect as to why also this operation failed. Seeing the insider threats within your own people.
Right.
And, of course, that's when clearances started to be taken more seriously, background checks. It was very,
So it was kind of like this period in the late 40s, early 50s was very much the CIA, the MI6, the precursors of them, kind of getting their sea legs on how they're going to execute operations during the Cold War, and probably till now as well. They got more practice during this time.
Correct, yeah.
So what was another, or actually let's talk a little bit about Enver Hoxha. His regime collapsed, I'm assuming in the late 80s. Like right when
the late 80s when the Iron Curtain was falling, yeah.
So do you know what year he kind of stepped down?
Oh my God, I forgot when he died. Late 80s is when he died.
Okay.
His prime minister takes the reins, but eventually, the country starts to collapse. Yeah. Like, I mean, the whole system starts to collapse, and in 91, that's when the republic forms. Yeah.
So much like the end of, Yugoslavia had a very bloody end, very sad, of course, what happened with them.
Yeah.
The violence and such. So Albania, communism kind of falls apart, late 80s, early 90s. I guess a question I have is, are there any intelligence operations by the government there that you know of that were done to try and preserve the communist system? Like,
I mean, more or less, they became very isolationist, right? So
much like Romania in the 70s too, because actually I watched not to interrupt, but I watched a cool documentary about Nicolae Ceausescu. He was the leader of communist Romania.
Yep.
He actually flew to North Korea many times. Him and Kim Jong-il got along wonderfully.
Oh, dude.
And Kim Jong-il would go to Romania, and like Nicolae Ceausescu was like, wow, we need to have this kind of attitude here, and he met a very kind of bloody end himself. I think they executed him on live TV, right? Like
they did, yeah. I'll
they
explain how it went down. So essentially, the op fails. This obviously gives a lot of room for the government to justify its like very brutal political like oustings after that, because they're like, you see, the West is
They're trying to
interfering
get us,
with us,
yeah.
all that sort of stuff. So absolutely, we're going to be more tough now, right? It justifies their efforts.
And I guess like not to like, I'm thinking about how Albania is a smaller country.
Yep.
Really on the periphery
Yeah.
of this communist kind of system. You
Correct.
know?
Yeah.
I know Tito and Hoxha were not in league with Stalin, but still like the idea is there.
So when Stalin dies, right, Khrushchev takes his power, and of course he starts to liberalize the Soviet Union a little bit. Hoxha is infuriated by this. He doesn't like how their policies are going, and it was that, and also their invasion of Czechoslovakia, which
68.
in 68, which eventually he leaves the Warsaw Pact, right, and starts to strengthen ties with China. Yeah, with Mao. They have a great relationship together. He's like, screw it. If Stalin's dead, I'll side with Mao. Then in the 70s, Richard Nixon, of course, comes to China and starts to begin relationships with, the Chinese economy.
Right, and that's the opening up.
That opens up.
What is the word for? Like I know we tried to lessen tensions with the Soviets.
Yeah,
during
we
this time
did.
too.
But
I forget the word, man.
Quite literally, yeah.
Détente.
Yeah.
Détente.
Yep, détente. Strengthen ties with, they strengthen ties together, and he sees this and he goes like, all right, now the Chinese are now essentially compromised from the West, and then they go full isolationist right after and just rely on themselves.
Right.
Which, leaves the country behind 20 years.
Right.
Throughout the 20th
and then the
century.
Cold War would end kind of 15, 20 years later.
Yep, Cold War ends, and yeah, it's just, they're still catching up to a lot, they're still trying to catch up to a lot of things that the West is having today. And there were other attempts, there was literally, his son, when Zog dies, his son goes to a Royal Military Academy, trains there, builds up his personal guard, and, after spending some time in Africa, he then tries to go up in 91. The Albanian people didn't accept him. 97, when there's anarchy that happens, tries to take over again. A referendum happens. Didn't vote in his favor. He believes that there was some interference with that, but ultimately, there was like a big monarchist rally.
Yeah.
Some shots go off, kind of.
Right.
Yeah, no, then, he's forced to leave because, he's just not accepted. There was a few other attempts. The Mustafa Band, which was Albanian gangsters, kind of, they had some ties with the Albanian monarchy.
In the 90s.
In the 80s, yeah.
In the 80s, okay. Because I know in Czech Republic, they had like a very messy period after the Cold War for a little bit. Like, it was like, they classified it as like mob rule in some ways. I want to say... we went well over 30 minutes.
Yeah,
no, but that's okay. I usually try and stop it before minute 40. So if you have anything you want to say to the audience, like any last points, like, may as well.
I would say, one, I love my heritage and everything. Really love the history behind it, but also grateful, with what we have. I was grateful, my parents did move here to the United States. Like, yourself with your grandmother, the tale of immigrant stories to pursue the American dream, and you can see it right here. Very grateful with the opportunities that I was afforded, when my parents moved here. And, I'm just gonna keep striving for more knowledge, and, knowledge is power, essentially.
Absolutely, and I know we can go all day with this,
Definitely
we really could.
Definitely learn from history. So,
thank you for coming on.
Absolutely,
Appreciate it.
man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Guys, that was 57. Look out for the next. I don't know when that's going to be, but we'll see. But Peter, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me again.
Bye, guys. Peace out.
See you.